Vadim's hands are shaking. He's afraid, hesitant, but most of all, excited. Should he do it? What consequences will it have? After a few deep breaths, he calms down. The ends justify the means. Highlight a line of code, copy, CMD, paste, enter. Vadim is not a hacker. In fact, he barely knows how to use a computer beyond playing his favorite video games. But now, for the first time in his life, Vadim is launching a cyberattack. He found a post with a code on a popular gaming forum and decided to try it out. Hundreds of miles away, in another country, a server gets pinged by Vadim's computer. Not once, not twice, but thousands of times. One by one, other computers join. People all across Russia run the same code as Vadim did, and millions of requests flood the server every second. The server can't deal with this torrent and crashes. A website goes down, then another, and another. At first, it was just informational sites belonging to the government, then social services systems and news websites. Finally, banking systems became inaccessible, and things got very serious. Vadim and thousands upon thousands of his compatriots just attacked a country. They became soldiers in the first ever full-scale cybernetic war. They played the role of a real army, lending their computers and internet connections for an attack on another state. This was the first attack of its kind, and it changed the very idea of how wars are waged. The realities everyone had taken for granted for thousands of years disappeared. The rule that wars had to be fought in the real world was no more. The world entered the age of cyber war, and returning to the old ways was no longer an option. There was no rollback. The world's first state-on-state cyber war didn't start in a place we usually see on the news. It wasn't China, Japan, the United Kingdom, or the US, even though specialists from America and other places learned a lot from this story. The world's first state-on-state cyber war started right here in Estonia. It's a small northern European country, roughly the size of Ohio, with barely a tenth of Ohio's population. Forests, swamps, lakes, and an occasional small city. In 2007, the entire country was plunged into chaos by a cyber attack the scale of which nobody even imagined before. But to understand why it happened, we have to understand Estonia first. For hundreds of years, this land was the battleground of empires, with Denmark, Sweden, Poland, Germany, and Russia prying it out of each other's hands, oblivious to the identity, culture, and wishes of the local population. As the Russian Empire crumbled, Estonians launched a costly independence war and managed to liberate their land from foreign conquerors for the first time in centuries. A couple of decades later, the Second World War started. Under an agreement with Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union invaded and occupied Estonia. The fragile peace did not last. The Nazis broke their agreement and invaded the Soviet Union, only to lose the war a few short years later. The Soviet troops once again swept across Estonia. From the point of view of the Soviets, they were liberating poor local folk from a bloody dictatorship. From the point of view of Estonians, one bloody dictatorship just changed to another. The same old song they had been hearing for centuries. It had to get worse before it got better. Fast forward to 2007. The Soviet Union disintegrated. Estonia is independent again. Not only that, but it launched a massive modernization campaign, branding itself as the land of technological innovation. There was a massive effort to digitize everything: banking, taxes, commerce. For the mid-2000s, this was quite radical. But Estonia's independence did not sit well with some people. And where many saw it as a positive development, some noticed an opportunity for disruption. This is Konstantin Goleskukov, a young and ambitious Russian politician. He's an aide to an influential member of the Russian parliament and a zealous supporter of the president, Vladimir Putin. Goleskukov holds the title of commissar in a youth movement called Nashi. One of the strategies Putin's government used to win young people over was setting up government-funded groups that posed as grassroots organizations. Nashi was one of these groups. It was meant to mimic the appeal of ultranationalists and neo-Nazi gangs, if not in appearance, then in ideology. Its goals were all about fighting corrupting Western influence, protecting the Russian nation, and seeking the restoration of the Soviet Union. Nashi members were often tasked with harassing Russian opposition members, foreign immigrants, and other minority groups. Goleskakov is in the middle of this. He's a career politician, and if he wants to rise, he needs to get noticed. He sets his sights on Estonia. Back in the day, the Soviets did everything they could to erase the Estonian identity, and after their empire disintegrated, the Estonian countryside remained littered with pieces of the Soviet past, commie blocks, military bases, defunct factories, and monuments. Hundreds upon hundreds of communist monuments. Most of them were cleared out back in the 90s, but some remained. Like this one, a bronze statue of a soldier. It marked Soviet war graves in the center of the Estonian capital, Tallinn. This was a frequent site of clashes between Estonian nationalists and the local pro-Russian minority, a major thorn in the side of the modernizing Estonian Republic, and something had to be done about it. After long deliberation, the Estonian government decided to remodel the square. The graves and the statue would be moved to a local cemetery, eliminating a point of contention, or at least shifting it away from the center of the city. The plan was shared with the Russian government, but Estonians received no response. The transfer of the statue began on April 26. Goleskakov seized the opportunity to strike. The targets were clear: agitate the Russian minority, manipulate it into believing that the Estonian government poses a danger, but also that it is powerless to stop any misconduct. Break down Estonia's cutting-edge digital governance system, throw the society back decades, cause total chaos. You know what else would cause total chaos? Us unable to make these videos. So please do all the things you need to please the algorithm, and we promise to regularly deliver the content you want. Thanks. The attack was multi-pronged, setting the example of what later became known as hybrid warfare. First, the informational component was unleashed. Goleskakov did not have to play any role in it. The Russian media did the bulk of the work. It crafted a narrative of the Estonian government turning fascist and wanting to demolish the Soviet monument as payback for the Allied victory in World War II. The fact that the graves were being moved with military honors and that Estonia called for full cooperation with the Russian government and local minorities was conveniently ignored. Using this as a jumping-off point, Goleskakov's own information initiative started. Posts mimicking the media's narrative popped up all across the Russian internet, at the time mostly comprised of forums and early social media sites. The meme culture as we know it today didn't exist yet, but these posts were crafted to be as memetic as possible for the time. Then, a call to action. On April 28, the members of Nashi began posting instructions across the forums. Do you want to help your motherland to fight fascism once again? Then post these simple commands. No need to be a hacker or a programmer. Just copy a code that will ping a random Estonian site thousands of times. On its own, this kind of attack is quite easy to deal with. Ping floods create a type of denial of service. By jamming a server with millions of requests, you make it inaccessible for regular users and take the whole service down. Even back in 2007, some firewalls knew how to deal with that. But then the second wave came, and it was a lot more sophisticated. Botnets. These are networks with thousands of devices infected by malware and enslaved by cybercriminals. The devices would communicate with Estonian servers, sending them well-written and timed requests, not just random pings. This kind of attack was extremely difficult to mitigate and could make servers inaccessible for weeks on end. At the same time, another prong of the attack was launched. Actual, skilled Russian hackers coordinated an effort to break into some Estonian sites, trying everything from injecting random code to sending phishing emails. And sometimes, they succeeded. Within hours, the Estonian government and private services began going down. At first, it was the websites of the government, ministries, parties, and law enforcement. Then, news websites went down, and the access to information was cut off for many citizens. Next up, the banking sector, as the botnets piled onto Swedbank, the largest bank in Estonia. The final strike was to be dealt to emergency services, such as the facilities that operate the phone number 112, Europe's analog of 911. If this last step had succeeded, the consequences of the cyber attack could have been measured in human lives. Because the cyber attacks were just the cherry on top of what had been happening in the real world. Remember, the first prong of the attack involved the Estonian Russian minority. It's debatable how much of its actions were influenced by Russia and how much of the masses acted on their own accord. But thousands of people flooded the streets in the largest riot in Estonian history. They smashed, burned, and looted their way through Estonian towns as the police were powerless to stop them. The entire country was paralyzed for days. And most of the chaos was a consequence of DDoS, the most basic kind of cyber attack there is. Attacks of this kind happened before, all across the world, but never at this scale. And never were they so well planned. The quantity took on a quality of its own. While the attack itself lasted several days, its peak was somewhat short-lived. It took Swedbank several hours to reboot its servers and restore its services. The attempts to disable the emergency number did not succeed. The Estonian government managed to get the denial of service under control. The throughput of the servers was sharply increased, the incoming requests got under strict control, and a whole package of additional measures was implemented. Gradually, the riots stopped too. It was time for the Estonian government to take a look at what happened and find out what lessons can be learned. For years after the attacks, the Russian government denied any involvement. Since the instigators of the chaos were in Russia, international law enforcement had no chance of punishing them. In 2009, a member of the Russian parliament, Sergei Markov, admitted that the attack was organized by his aide. Later, the same year, the name of that aide became known, as Goleskakov claimed responsibility for the attack in another interview. In both cases, the perpetrators straddled the line between boasting of their involvement and saying that the attack was a grassroots initiative run by patriotic Russians who wanted to defend their country from the scary Estonians. However, from their comments, it's pretty clear it was as grassroots as the entire Nazi organization. That is, not at all. And while it involved thousands of individual people who did the majority of the work, the whole ordeal was firmly organized by people belonging to the Russian government. This was one of the first cases of government officials launching a cyber attack on another country, with the expressed purpose of causing harm. The fact that the whole process was so well documented was also quite unique. The Estonian government declassified everything about the attack and went on to accuse Russia of organizing it, a practice that was unimaginable just a few years earlier. One of the proponents of this kind of approach, and one of the people who was heavily involved in the whole story, was Lauri Almann, permanent secretary of the Estonian Ministry of Defense at the time.
But I think the biggest dividend that we got from that event was the decision to talk about it, and to talk about it as much and as loudly as possible, to declassify everything that we were able to declassify, and that would be 99% of what was going on. So let me tell you, the first instinct of any government official, I am willing to bet a sort of small amount of money, is to classify as much as possible. This sort of stamp on top and bottom of the page that says secret or classified or even top secret in some cases gives us some kind of weird comfort. This is now a case study, and the case study that actually helped to raise enormous amount of money for cybersecurity globally.
However, the results of that were mixed. While Estonia immediately became one of the most outspoken proponents in increasing cybersecurity awareness, the world of 2007 was not ready for the message.
The United Nations was hilarious because the committee that dealt with cyber and remotely cyber issues was headed by a gentleman from Belarus. So he wasn't too keen on dealing with it, and his was from a Latin American country. I cannot remember where it was from, but I clearly remember sitting in New York in the United Nations office. The guy did not have a computer on the desk, and he was to the tune of 65 years old, and it was one of the most bizarre meetings that I have ever had, because I clearly see that the gentleman doesn't absolutely understand what I'm talking about and doesn't see the importance, or is he faking it?
And while years had to pass before the world as a whole began taking cybersecurity seriously, some lessons were learned. The technique of DDoS became even more popular and even more widely applied, and the use of botnets to jam servers is a daily occurrence nowadays. The use of grassroots organizations and popular movements to mask government activity became a standard technique in the toolbox of nearly every authoritarian state. However, the effectiveness of this kind of approach decreased as well. An entire industry formed around protecting servers from denial of service and preventing the disruption of crucial infrastructure. Despite the abundance of these attacks, their effects are minimal, in many ways thanks to the lessons learned in 2007. Attacks on Estonia became a textbook case of state-on-state cyber warfare, an example of how to plunge an entire country into chaos and get away with it. but also how to make the right decisions under fire from a much stronger opponent.
Estonia was also one of the first countries, or one of the first instances where Russia was testing out their cyber doctrine. And the lesson learned to this age is that Russia and bad actors in general are using this region to test out their bad stuff. So if you see trade ships or oil tankers dragging their anchors on the Baltic Sea, we don't need to think only about the significance to the Baltic region on that, but they're probably trying out again something that is going to be mainstream. And voila, you have oil tankers dragging their anchors just a couple of weeks later near Taiwan Strait.
If you want to see the natural evolution of the attack on Estonia, look no further than the NotPetya infections a decade later, an attack that was orders of magnitude greater, and somehow orders of magnitude scarier. It was one where the lessons Russia learned in 2007 were implemented to the fullest. The gripping story of NotPetya is something we're going to cover in another episode of No Rollback, the series about events that changed cyberspace as we know it. If you want more content like this, please subscribe and let us know what else you would like to see in this series. We'll see you in the next video.